What's up everyone? On this issue of Motive Garage, we continue work on our R32 GT-R Project Supercar Killer. Now our R32 has undergone a complete refurbishment on the outside, but there's still quite a lot of little things we want to sort out on this car. And while we're waiting on engine parts and for the engine to be built and for the interior parts to get done, it's a perfect time to tackle a lot of those small problems. Now first up, the roll cage was done a couple of years ago, but it never got painted purely because we had a complete interior in the car, and it's a pretty nightmare of a job to do. But now that the windows are out and most of the car's stripped, it's a good time to paint that roll cage, even though later it is actually going to be wrapped with Alcantara or leather trim around it as well. But we just obviously want to stop it from getting surface rust, tidy that up. We're going to remove the seat belts to remove some weight, they're not needed anymore. We're going to fix some things underneath the car, a couple of spots of rust, and tidy a few things up. We're going to pull up that old Haltech dash, and we're going to get the new Haltech IC7 dash into the car as well. Plenty to do on our GT-R, so let's get to it. I reckon there's 10 kilos in that. Oh well, less weight I have to lose. So I've gotten most of the things out of the car that I kind of wanted to get out of the way, or I needed something done, etc. So it's time to paint the cage. And what I've got is this from 3M, Grippy sanding cloth. Now, normal sandpaper is obviously pretty straight. You try and bend it. It never quite really bends around properly or smoothly, but this stuff is actually designed to be grippy on the back, and it's actually totally flexible to sort of contours to the surface. And the good thing about this is you can just wrap it around the cage, and essentially, don't get a dirty mind, but just go like that. Well, that was one of the worst and least enjoyable jobs I've ever had to do inside a car. I do suggest if you do want to paint a roll cage in your car, try and do it when the car's a bare shell and no interior in it, because it makes it a bit of a mission. I've been meaning to do that for a while, but the cage got done a couple of years ago with the interior still in it. It's been driving, getting used, etc. So finally glad to have that done for a few reasons. One, you no longer have raw steel just sitting there getting surface rust on it all the time, so it does tidy it up. And two, it obviously just looks a lot better. And three, by being black, it'll actually just disappear into the car a little bit more. So it'll be even less obvious that this car has a roll cage once the interior is back together. So with that done, the next thing on our list on the interior to do is install the new Haltech IC7 dash. So I've been using Haltech dashes in a lot of my cars for a long time now, but obviously they were dashes that they got from an external supplier. But now Haltech has their very own in-house design, developed, built dash, the IC7. Now they've listened to what people want with their cars, and a lot of people now with street cars want digital dashes. Well, it used to be more of a race car only thing for data logging and things like that, but now with so many engine conversions and complete ECU solutions for the car, a lot of guys with street cars want these aftermarket dashes. Why? Well, they just look cool. Look at it. They look cool, they light up, they look really good, they're fully programmable, and there's heaps you can do with them. So the new IC7 from Haltech is kind of the size that you want to have enough information that you want, looks good, fits where you want it to fit. It's got heaps of shift light options and warning light options at the top. It's got buttons built into it rather than have to wire them in separately, and it's a pretty cool piece of gear. So we have a look inside the box. We've got the dash. What else we got? All right, USB stick with the software. Now don't laugh, you've been surprised how many times I've been stuck with no internet and you're trying to make something work with software, so at least that comes with that. Some extra wiring in case you need to do any extra stuff spliced into the dash, i.e. indicators and things like that, because you can wire all that in, plus screws to mount it. Thanks guys. Okay, so this is a COM port to go from the dash to your laptop so you can program it. Now you can leave this bit in the car. It actually comes with a little bracket here so you can kind of mount that adapter for the USB somewhere so it can actually stay in the car if you want to do it that way. And then obviously the USB extension cord to go to your laptop. So that's one lot of the wiring. And then the other part to the wiring is this. This is the plug for the back of the dash, which has its CAN connector. So what makes this really simple is it's just power, earth, and then 2 wires for the CAN connection. So a CAN bus system. So rather than having hundreds of wires go into the dash for each sensor, essentially it just gets a signal from the ECU and it can read pretty much everything that the ECU reads and put it up onto the dash. What I do really like about the IC7 that you didn't have in the older dashes that Haltech did, the race pack style stuff, you had to wire in your own power, ground and other bits like that, but essentially this one, if you've got an Elite 2500 or one of the other Elites that has the CAN plug-in port, you can literally just get this, plug it in, and the dash works straight away, which I think's pretty cool and makes life pretty easy. So no point mucking around. We're actually going to plug it into the car, even though it's got no engine, no anything. It's still got its ECU in there. We're going to plug into the Elite 2500 in our GT-R. We'll get the laptop up and we'll start mucking around and see how cool this IC7 really is. All right, the wiring in the car at the moment is out a little bit, just purely due to the fact that we were painting the cage and needed it out of the way. So the Elite 2500, you can just plug that straight into the bottom of it. That's it. All right, so you just plug that in like that, get our comms port in, plug into the car. This side plugs into the laptop. And if we go turn the power on in the car, we can have a bit of a play. All right, so first up, let's get the dash software open, ready to go. Dash not connected, let's turn it on. All right, so the Elite 2500 is basically already got the function turned on to allow it to talk to a dash. So it just lights straight up, ready to go. Obviously, none of the sensors are connected in our car, so not everything's going to read correctly, but you can still see what's laid out here and what you've got. So open up the software, we just load in from dash. Now we have a representation of what our dash has here. Now this isn't reading what the dash reads, it's not actually reading any data, it's just the layout that the dash has. And the good thing about this is where you actually program all your warning lights, how big you want your tacho to be, colors, everything. There's all sorts of stuff. So now with this, you have pretty much, unlimited options with how many different screens you want to have, what you want them to look like. So you can have everything from looking like an old race style, like a Motec style dash or a race pack or AIM style dash set up like that if you really want to, if you're so used to it. You can have like purely a diagnostic page set up if you want. This is called basic race, old school. There's just some options here to give you some ideas, but look at this, it's just like a cool old school car looking thing. Look at that, that's actually pretty funny. They've got like little stickers across here to make it look like someone's just made little stickers of what each thing is. So you can actually have it look totally different to the original one, but we're just gonna muck around with the original one first. So if you wanna change anything, you pretty much just click on each spot like this and then you can change what it is. So for example, if I want to change this to something else, you can see down the bottom here, it just says manifold pressure. I can just click on here and just start looking for whatever I want. So let's just say on the left-hand side, I want to have nothing but temps and pressures. I might go, okay, cool, air temperature. And now it's changed to that. So you can see what it's reading. And then you can basically just do this however you want. So for me personally, I would make the front page be something along the lines of, your normal driving page, your default page, how you would want to drive it. The other thing you can start doing is also, if you have a look at this oil pressure one, it's got here selected that it enables a color change. So the color change threshold is just got to do with essentially a warning light. So if you've got things like battery voltage too low, or you've got oil pressure in the wrong spot, or too low, too high, etc., whatever you've set up in your parameters, you basically can make it change color as well as have a warning light. Now if you get a warning light in one of these, this X button is actually to clear the warning, so it won't always hold it there. If you've got outside your parameters and backed it off, it can change. All right, let's muck around with some other stuff. Let's go colors. So we go over here to the side, colors, gauge background. Let's go for something more like a silver. See, it's changed all over here. That's the gauge background. I kind of like in cars when they have all those blues and stuff, so I'm gonna go for a blue. Gauge label, I'm gonna keep in white. Gauge value, I'm gonna change that as well. All right, so a bit of mucking around with some colors and bam, look at that. Totally different color scheme altogether. We've got some blues and light blues and silver and gray going on here. So that's how it'll light up, and that'll look pretty cool. So once you've done what you want here, watch this. So now we go update dash. It'll disconnect. So the dash will turn off, turn back on again, and bam, there's your new color scheme. Check it out. So the other thing we can do is you can go into your shift lights, and here is all your RPM for your shift lights. So there's double of everything. So essentially that lights up from the outside in and lights it all up. So that you can just program your shift lights in here, you can program your brightness, you can even set things for day and night presets so it knows what kind of where to start. But on here, you can actually press this manually anyway to adjust brightness. You can actually reprogram the buttons if you really want to. So cancel later, a long press on the X versus a short press. So at the moment, this just goes between the different screens. So that's all those buttons do right now. This one returns you back to your main screen in case you're lost. The X clears any alarms. And a long press will reset the odometer. And then you have plus and minus for brightness. But you can change some of this stuff. All right, let's do some stuff that the GT-R needs. 8,000 RPM. Pfft. That must be for all those weird 2J and Barra people. Let's do it like a real GT-R, 10,000 RPM. Change the start of the arc to 9,000. 9,000 red arc, 10,000 limit. That's where we want it. All right, let's have a look now. Let's get some shift lights going because you can actually run through. So I want to start at 9,000. All right, so what we can do along here is we can actually slide to simulate what goes on. So you can see as this comes up past 9, you can see the shift lights across the top coming on. So I can all the way through to full RPM, and if I go past the preset RPM, this will go ballistic and it'll say engine RPM over rev. So this is literally my first time playing with the IC7. I've seen them in cars, I've seen them at car events set up so you can touch the buttons and look at it, but it's the very first time I've plugged my laptop into the dash and had to muck around with it. And as you can see, it's pretty intuitive. Straight off the bat, it's set up well, but the good thing is, forget race car, forget all those sort of features. Just for someone that has this in their cars, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it. You can program a bit to have different colors, different layouts. It's just a really cool thing. You actually have a lot of fun with it. From a street car perspective, having the brightness control is good. Having things like the indicator control and different warning lights, really good for a street car, but it's also great for a race car. Nice and big, you can get all the information you need, just need the one dash. Forget all those other gauges, one dash to show you everything that you need. Some people will say, what about logging? Well, if you've got an Elite 2500 or a Nexus, you do logging in your ECU anyway, so you don't need your dash to do logging. Will they add a GPS logging function to this dash at a later stage? I'm sure they probably will. I probably hope they do for track mapping, but you can log in your ECU or your Nexus, etc., instead of doing it in this. So yeah, in summary, this is cool. It's actually really cool. They've really thought about what the consumer and what the end customer actually wants in their car, because for how easy and intuitive it was to use, I will say this, all of the previous dashes you could get from Haltech were nowhere near this intuitive. In fact, you had to learn quite a fair bit how to use them and maximize them. Even installing them was sometimes a bit of a pain, but this thing, plug it in, turn it on, plug the laptop in, muck around with it, have some fun, and you're ready to go. So now we're going to put it in the car. So for now, the way we're going to install this into the car is with one of Haltech's generic mounts and visors. The whole idea of this is you can mount it to the steering column, dash sits in like this, bolts in, already done. Really, it's just 2 bolts onto your plastic cover on the steering column and away you go. We are looking at getting a fully integrated dash mount to put it right inside the dash at a later stage, but right now, I still want to be able to see the 4-wheel drive light and the fuel gauge, etc. in the dash. Until we sort some of those things out and wire them into this, I'll keep the factory dash and have this on the steering wheel like I did before, and we'll change that later, but it's going to be pretty simple. Sit it on the steering column, drill the holes in, Bob's your dog. Now we've still got some interior to go back in the car and sort all this out because some of the wiring's apart from when we were painting the roll cage, but you can see where the dash fits. Looks pretty good. Where the old one was, start her up, voila, new digital dash in the car. So the roll cage is done, the new dash is in the car, now it's up on the hoist to take care of a few more small things, and that is to get rid of some surface rust under the car where we did the roll cage. A little bit of rust is still there, and we pretty much just didn't do it properly. We just put paint on it originally. There's a few spots under the car that have taken hits, dings, etc., and have chipped away at the metal, so you can see the metal there, so we need to paint back over that. Where we've clearanced the jet trag to make it easier to fit in the housing, we're just going to tidy some of that up and put some new underbody under there just to give things a little bit tidier underneath. It's another one of those jobs I've just been dreading doing for a while because it's not very fun if you've ever worked under an old Japanese car. Let's go. Now, most people are probably thinking, why haven't I just cleared all of it back to bare metal? Well, we only want to treat the bit that we know that had some surface rust. So, yes, when we first paint this section, it'll probably look cleaner and newer than the rest of it, but 5 minutes of thrashing and it'll all look the same again. So, we essentially just wanted to go back to bare metal on the bits that we know had potential surface rust, clear that bit up, and that's it. So it'll probably look a bit patchy under here to begin with, but that won't last long once it runs. So like most things on a GT-R, things snowballed out of control underneath. I was just going to show you guys a quick rust repair where the roll cage has joined to the floor and there's a bit of surface rust. That was pretty easy. The 4 spots where it joined, all we did was just get out the wire wheel, grind back all of the paint and crap underneath the car until we got to bare metal, put some undercoat on there to seal up the bare metal, stop it from rusting, then put some underbody over there to give it that same texture as factory, and then a quick spray of black over the top to match up the colour. That was the easy, normal part, but what started off as a 4-hour job turned into a 40-hour job. Why? Well, firstly, I made a clean patch underneath, and once I made a clean patch, I kept on going. The good thing about that is now I can tell the difference between what is just the treated or galvanised style steel treatment on the car versus which parts has underbodies. And if you look under the car, basically up the middle of the car is all sort of treated galvanised metal, so it has that grey-green appearance. I didn't actually realise that colour was under there with all the road grime on there, so it was good to clean all that off and get it looking pretty fresh underneath. And most of the underbody is kind of from the chassis rail outwards. Now, kind of once I'd done those 4 spots I knew I needed to do, there was actually the 4 parts on the sill where you know that people that can't jack their car properly, or even do jack it properly and just the Nissan sills fall apart. I actually tidied those up a fair bit. I didn't try to make them perfect because if you want to make the sills perfect on a GT-R, it is a massive job. You've got to get new ones and new guards and side skirt areas, and it's a huge job at the panel beater. I just wanted to tidy it up, make sure there wasn't any rust in there behind where it was folded over. So I straightened it out as best I could, did the same sort of deal, ground it all back to bare metal, gave it a treatment, put underbody over it, and it just tidied it up quite a lot. It's not perfect, but it's a lot tidier and will help the car last another 30 years before I probably need to look at that again. Same with the chassis rails, the dents in the chassis rail from the jack and hitting things, etc. Huge job to fix, and I don't plan on selling the car, so I just tidied them up a little bit. But while we're doing all that, what we did stumble across was actually an area of rust that was more like typical cancer that you find behind the rear tyres on a GT-R and those rear guards. Essentially above the exhaust and also where the factory air conditioning decides to leak into the floor, there was actually a section of rust that didn't look too bad at first glance, but once I ground it back to bare metal, there was actually holes in the floor. Now, some people will say, oh, you've got to cut that out and weld a new plate in or whatever, but it's in a really awkward spot. It's right next to the chassis rail, it's next to another bracket for the gearbox. It's in a really awkward spot to replace. So rather than try and cut it out and put another bit of metal in there, they're only small holes. So really all I wanted to do was block those holes up and stop the rust from getting worse. So I essentially used I guess what you could call a metal Bondo. So like Bondo has a hardener and the putty itself, you put that together, mix it up, put it over the surface, seal it all up, and it actually dries like metal, and then it sands back like metal. So that's exactly what I did. Filled the holes up, sanded it back, put primer over it to seal it up, put the underbody over it, then put black over it, and unless you know what you're looking for, you can barely tell that a repair's even been done there. So that was a really good way to tidy up some cancer under the floor of the car. Where the actual holes weren't really in a spot I was worried about structural integrity, but just the areas around it were probably too hard to cut out and work with. So that's tidied that up. A little bit of extra paint over some scratches around the gearbox tunnel as it comes up into the firewall, and the underneath of our GT-R is now looking a whole lot better than it did last week. So just seems to be the theme of this build is just touch one part, make a clean spot, 4-hour job becomes a 40-hour job. That's the rabbit hole that you jump down with a GT-R.